Alright, so in this lecture, I'm going to show the process of being able to take some render passes and take your Maya file and straighten the line. Sorry, it didn't look like it was crooked a second ago. There you go. And being able to put items inside or composite them together inside Nuke. So this is my original render, and then this is my updated one. And what's neat about this is that once we have the label on here, we are able to scoot it around. So I'll just rotate. There goes SpongeBob. Or if I scoot this over, I can very easily replace this texture with a different image, and everything works awesomely. Okay, so first things, let's start with the Maya part. So inside Maya, I've modeled an object. I have a dome light and a couple of area lights. And this is my rendering out of there. So my first focus was just on getting something that was appealing. I should add a little bit of light inside here. It's a bit darker. But if I go back to Nuke, you'll see that the rest of this is a bit lighter, but that's still dark. So it really needs a bit more light so that it catches better. So light your stuff. The material for this is a low weight, so like 0.0, and it's like pretty much black. And then the specular is all the way up with the color kind of low. Roughness is in the middle. IOR is at 2.3, and there's a little bit of anisotropy. And then on a coat, I have that up to 1. My color is the white, no roughness, and IOR is 1.815. So the specular basically is one of your reflections, and the coat is a second reflection. So there should be a difference, otherwise there's not really a huge point because they'll look the same. So if you take this one's roughness up, that gives you like a nice blurry reflection, and then you take the coat and you put the roughness down, and they give you a shiny reflection, and that's what makes it look so nice. Okay. Let me jump out of this camera. There we go. Alright, so here's my lighting. I have one area light on this side, one area light on that side, and one area light right here. And again, this is kind of lighting up the top of this. I'll probably tilt it back some so that it lights up more of the inside where my camera is shooting at. For the, well, if you want to see the settings for this, white light, 250. I did change this one to a disc. Shadows is the same. On this light, I kept the roundness at 0. It's still a quad. Kept the roundness at 0, but then I softened the edges quite a bit. And the same thing on this one, except I did add some roundness and less softness. Okay? And so the idea with that is just trying to be able to get, not that, being able to try to get these highlights along the edges. Because it's black, I didn't want too much stuff in the way of it. And then I also have a dome out here, which is right now just a low intensity, just to kind of help fill in some of the stuff. I'm going to put this on the other screen so I can monitor that. Alright, for my ground plane, I added a shadow matte. And this is a default shadow matte. I haven't changed anything inside here, except for this. I clicked that on and it gave me, a little bit more bounce. I left use background on. All the other stuff is just default. I was having some issues getting it to render correctly, so I turned off cast shadows and I turned off specular reflection. Just so you can see what that's going to look like. I'll make a new use background or shadow matte. Maya has one called use background. Alright, so that's what it looks like by default with those buttons clicked off. Come on. So opaque and these two. And it looks like that. And I'm going to take the sky dome up just a bit just so we can see it a bit better. Okay, now this is what it looks like. I'm going to close this window and then reopen it again. Sometimes just doing that, will change what your render looks like. Throughout me setting this up, I knew that these buttons should be doing something and they weren't. So I just, closed this window a few times and then it seemed to work. Even switching my camera view would give me a bit different results as well. So just be aware of that. So now if I click on the ground, I need to make this opaque because that's how that's set up. I need to turn off cast shadows on this item. Okay, so I don't want this to cast shadows because the ground shouldn't really be casting shadows. That doesn't make sense. And then once I do that, I get this big reflection of the ground in here, which is fine if that's what I'm going after, but I really wanted to just create a clean plate with this. So I turned off specular reflections, and then that gets rid of that item. So now I basically just have this reflective bowl right here. Cool. You could also pipe in an HDR into this. So if I went to the color of this, I have several HDRs in this folder, just thinking. So I'll grab that one. Actually, I'll grab the loft. Alright, there it is. So now we can see the reflection of the loft in here, plus we also get these lights. If I need to, I can grab, I'm going to stop that for a second. I can grab the HDR in the background and rotate it to hit maybe a different spot of this. Like maybe I don't want this big area back here to be bright because then that would look odd with my lights. So I want that to be over to the side. And then that would update, where these lights are coming from, where the reflections are coming from. So definitely something you can do. I also could turn down the in-camera. That way it's not in the actual camera itself. Now it looks like the shadow disappeared. It didn't. If I go to my alpha, you'll see the shadow is definitely still there. What else? That's pretty much it. Okay, so that's the setup of what I modeled and what I put into the scene. Now to get the passes, I'm going to jump over to Nuke for a second. Anytime you are wondering about passes, render out whatever you think you might need, and then in Nuke you can connect a layer contact sheet. And what this will do is it'll show you, here's what the passes look like. So that way you don't waste your time rendering out stuff that you don't need. Okay, now some of these are just dark, you can't see them. So if I pull this up, up the other way. I really can't see anything with that one. Let me pull this one up. There we go. Pull both up and you can really see it. So now this one you can definitely see there is some indirect diffuse in here. Okay, we wouldn't see that a second ago when these were both off. So that one is giving me something, it's just very subtle. I know it's giving me something because I watch these numbers, and as I move my mouse, those numbers update. Okay, even the Z here looks like there's nothing there, but there definitely is something there with the Z. Okay, here's the main ones the main thing you're trying to do anytime you composite. So we're trying to get back to this image. Okay, so when we look at this image, we want to be able to grab whatever is inside this bunch and put them together to get that, and then be able to enhance it further. So here is the shadow. Now this one would work because we would be able to get the shadow inside here. But this one is actually a nicer one because I can actually see the shadow just kind of separated. And then this is the shadow mask, so I can see what that's going to do. Here's the coat albedo. Here is the coat itself. Here is the albedo. Here's the Z depth. Here's the coat direct and the coat indirect. Okay, so if you're wondering what's the difference between like the direct, indirect, the non one, and the albedo one, there is a definition for albedo, but it just seems like it's anytime I'm rendering it, it's just pretty flat. Okay, so if you look at it, the way I look at it is it's basically just like where the stuff would exist. So if this is where the coat exists is on the entire thing, This is where the specular exists on this entire thing. In some of these areas, it might be a bit darker, but it's still existing over there. Okay, so assuming that's what that means. I typically don't use that. I'll use it for actually creating a mask instead of rendering out a mask pass, because it's like for this, it's exactly what I need to cut out. Now, the coat direct is all the direct illumination that's hitting it. So the light comes in, it hits it, it lights it up. And the coat indirect is all the light that bounces off the floor and then comes back in. So if you look at the direct here and the indirect, these are the two separate pieces. And then the coat itself, here are those two passes put together. So you can see how this line is right there. That's that line right there, okay? So diffuse has that too. Where's my diffuse? Oh, I turned it off because there really wasn't a whole lot of diffuse. There it is. There's not a whole lot of diffuse coming into this one because the diffuse is so low. Like, I'd have to really crank these values up in order to see it, but it's the same thing. Here's the indirect diffuse, here's the direct diffuse, and then here is the diffuse put together. Okay, so that's what that's doing. For something like this, it's getting most of its stuff from the base color and then some reflections. Okay, so I know in this one, if I spacebar out and I look at this, every time I have a shuffle, that's me pulling out a different render pass. So if you see all those render passes that I just had, of those I'm using 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5. Yep. Yeah, that's right. Okay. So I'm only using 5 passes. So if I look at what those passes are, I can just render those ones. So I'm using my coat albedo, and I use that just like I said as a mask. Under my render settings here, under my AOVs, I'm going to leave the AO here and the Z. Can I delete? Yes, I can. Okay, so I'm just going to remove all the other ones. Actually, it'll be quicker just to do that. There we go. All right, so I know that I'm going to be using a coat albedo, so I'm going to go to my built-in, find the coat albedo, which is just the mask. There's also a mask one that I could make and render out. I'm fine with just using that. That works, so I'll use that. In your render Arnold view, you can switch to the coat albedo and just verify, yep, that's what it looks like. Cool. What else? So we go here. That's the coat albedo that I'm using. Again, I'm just using that one as a mask just to cut my cup out. This shuffle here is my specular direct. So I will go find my specular direct. And just for fun, let's see, there's the specular here, and there's the specular direct. So remember, like I could grab the specular indirect too, but there's so little value in that, it really doesn't have a whole lot. So I actually could use it, in this case, either one, specular or specular indirect. I'm not going to split that apart, so I'm fine with using that. I also have the, I believe this is the ambient occlusion. Nope, that's the coat one. So let's go find coat. And again, I'm not splitting apart the coat, so I'm fine adjusting that. This is the ambient occlusion one. So ambient occlusion isn't listed here, so I need to add a custom one. So you can call it whatever you want, but obviously it should say ambient occlusion or AO or OA if you're a Who's the Boss fan. I go to ambient occlusion, which is here, and then I have to click the arrow, click this. Let me stop that render view. And I'm hitting Control A, trying to bring up my attribute editor. There it is. And I need to add a default shader to this. And what this is going to do is tell us what it's supposed to render out like. So I go to the Arnold section, I type in amb, and ambient occlusion comes up. I'm going to re-hit my render button. I'm going to switch this to ambient occlusion. And what I want to do is get a nice little rendering of it. Now, part of my scene darkened out even more because the ambient occlusion was so dark in this area. So if I take this far clip down, oops, too much. It's a subtle thing, but it's going to lighten it up a bit. If I bring this up, yeah, in this case, I'm not doing anything in this scene. All right, let's try spread. pull the spread down, this is going to darken it a lot more, and this will lighten it. You can go higher than these, apparently not on that one. We could before, or whatever. There we go. The goal in this one is just trying to get something that looks nicely balanced, because I can always come in here and adjust what these color values are later. Like, there's no point in me lightening this now, because inside Nuke I can lighten it. If I lighten it too much now, it's going to be harder for me to darken it to pull those values back. Let me knock that down to 1. Hey, there we go. So if I set this far clipping down to 1, because my scene is a bit smaller, I guess, you'll see how we can adjust what that's doing. There we go. So I probably want to put this at, let's say, 1 or 1.5. And that way it'll still give me some darkness inside the cup, but not crazy dark like it was. Okay. And then if I take that fall off up, you'll see how that'll actually like crisp up where that ambient occlusion is happening. So it's really dark right there. And then I'll play with maybe the far clip again. Oops, maybe I took that fall off up too much. There it is. So 0.5 looks like a good number. I get a nice crisp black line here, nice soft darkness there, and some nice shadowing around this. Okay, so that's how I would set up my ambient occlusion. The more samples, the smoother it's going to be. So if I needed a bit smoother, I could crank it up to 10. For something like this, 3 is going to be sufficient, especially for speed purposes. I'll leave it at that. Oops. Oh no. Don't do it. Don't do it. Oh, you did it. It just docked itself inside here. I need to find the person who invented that. It's not a good invention. Alright, and finally we have the shadow matte, which is right here. Oops, right here. And shadow matte. Okay. Now again, I can look at these and basically try to calculate what I'm going to do as far as bringing this together. The shadow matte. Where's my shadow matte? Let me view that just to make sure. That's what that looks like. Oh, there it is. Shadow matte. The shadow matte, you'll see too, is giving off some shadow inside this area. So I could debate whether I even want that. The purpose of being able to composite and post is that we can control all the stuff afterwards. So I may want to use just the shadow mask and not have this big dark area right here. That's definitely a possibility of using that. Now what we lose is the shadow work that's on there. So this one has some shadow work on here. So again, it's something that you just kind of play with and see, like, what do I want out of that. So I go to shadow matte and I can add that into my list. I can also go to shadow mask. Oops, under here, shadow mask, and boom, I can add that too. And if I decide I use it, then great. If not, oh well. I'm going to click on the arrow and go to select AOV node. Go to the attribute editor again. And I want to make sure that on my default Arnold driver, okay, and this is for all of these, that I click on this merge AOV. That way all my AOVs, all these guys, will be joined into one item. Sweet. So now I go ahead and I render it out. So I hit the render button. I can verify each one of these. Oops, I forgot my depth. Go back to my render settings. I need to go to built-in. I need to add Z and drop that over also. Okay, I can also take up these settings. It's best when you're playing with stuff to keep the settings relatively low until you've gone through the process in Nuke and you have it all set up. Because this process will go a lot quicker if you have the ability to jump back and forth pretty quick. So if I set that to 1, the rendering is going to look grainy, but that'll be fine because it'll go 10 times quicker rendering back and forth and tweaking things versus having this up to, let's say, 10 or 20 or whatever. So for now, I'm just going to leave it at 3 because I know that those are going to work. So I go ahead and let this render out. Here's my coat, there's my albedo, there's my mask, there's my matte, there's my specular, And there's the beauty. Okay. Once this is done on the bottom, I'm going to go to File and then say Save Multi-Layer EXR. And then what this will do is it will allow me to save this right here. Yes. And it puts it right into my folder. And all the layers, all of these ambient occlusion, or I lost the A part. Output variables. The A I can't remember, but the O would be output variables. All those go into my stuff, into my EXR. Okay. Now I want to be able to add a label to this. So if I go to this item, I know my camera is set up right there, right? So my label for this would, let's say, be, actually let's do this. Let's just go all the way around. Okay, my label would be, let's say, in that area. So I may have a label that goes all the way around there. Now, if I'm not sure exactly where, I may want to go a couple extra rows just to be safe. All right, so that's good. So now I'm going to go to Mesh, Edit Mesh, sorry, and then say Extract. And then do separate, but don't offset. Okay, so then I'm just going to switch back to my Move tool, switch back to Object Mode. Over here in my outliner, it gives me a that ring, and then it gives me this. Okay, so one thing that I have inside Nuke is I have all of my render passes right here. So that's all my render passes are lined up right there. I'll show how to bring that in case you've forgotten. The other thing that I need is I need to bring in this piece of geometry and I need to bring in that camera so that I can do the label. So I have this piece of geometry here. I'm going to grab the other one and just hide it. I'm going to grab my surface and I'm going to delete history on it. And I can delete history on everything. And then unparent it. It comes inside of a group. I want to unparent it. I want to give it a name, label surface. Perfect. And I want to go through and lay out the UVs. Nuke has a way to lay out UVs to a point, but not to the extent that we need. Okay. So here's all of my stuff. You'll notice that the seam for this is right here. So that's something that I have to be conscious of because I may not want my label to, I may want it to cross this area. And if I have my seam there, I can't do that. So I'm going to go to my edges. I'm going to grab all of these edges. There we go. And I'm going to hold Control and delete this, or deselect that. And then I'm going to merge that together. Okay, so now I have one big strand of stuff. I'm going to go to my shell. I'm going to make sure I unfold. There we go. And you'll notice that obviously this went on a bit of an angle. I may not want that bit of an angle. So let me lay this out maybe a different way. Let me try to go to cylindrical, project, wrap it around. And I'm going to turn on my checkerboard. And this I'm just going to do manually so that I don't get that bend inside there. Because ideally it would have a bend, that way it looks better. That way we don't get these like squishiness at the bottom. Or at the top really doesn't have much, but the squishiness at the bottom. But I want to make sure that I have a nice even spot for it. So my items most likely won't go down there. I'll keep them right in the center. Alright, so that should be good. I will shrink this down slightly like that. Cool. Now if I was going to even split this up into maybe two sections, I could have one here and one there or whatever. Alright, so my camera is here facing right at my seam. I can, because this is a circle, I can just rotate it around. The other thing I could do is if I didn't want to do that, I could split this in the middle and then just sew the other end of it and then move it over. There we go. So now my seam is on the opposite side. Hopefully I'll never go over to that side. Alright, so now I'm ready to take this piece of geometry out of here and take the camera also out of here. So I'm going to grab both of these items. I've set keys on the camera, so I just grab it and hit S. That way it doesn't move. And I'm going to grab the bowl also, and I'm going to go to my export selection, And I'm going to export it as an FBX. Alright, so FBX right there. Put this into my, I put it in my source images folder, so I'm just going to, I guess, leave it there because that's where my other ones are. So I'll just call this camera export object. Now I need to make sure that obviously geometry gets included, which it has, okay? And there's no smoothing in Nuke, so any kind of smoothness I would need to obviously make sure it's smoothed out ahead of time. If there's any kind of animation, I need to bake the animation. So I would say animate, bake, and I would tell it how many frames to bake, and it would bake in any animation that I have. I don't have animation in this. Also, if I had a camera, which I do, I want to make sure that's checked. Okay, so export selection. There we go. Now I did have to play before with getting these things in there correctly. I had to export it just a few times, and sometimes it was by itself, sometimes it was together. And the last time I did it, it was both of them together, and it worked fine. The first time I did it was both together, and they didn't work fine. But if it gives you any hassle, you can come down here to the file format and change it when you export it to 2014, 2015 instead of 2018. Okay, that's just a random thing that seems to be just a fun little quirky way that it works. Adjust to, or just make sure of, is when we hit S down here in Nowheresville, that our full-size format is 960 by 540 or whatever we rendered out. The only spot that would really come into play is under the scanline renderer. That needs to be the same size. And then any images that we would have brought in, or any rotoscoping that we would have done, or any constants we would have made, they use that number as what they are doing with that. So, all right, so let's step aside for a second and let's do the 3D stuff. So to bring in the 3D geometry, we hit tab and we type in read geo. Okay, so I'm going to save this real quick, and I'm going to try to move this up here. I think it'll just be easier. No, like a second view. There it is. Cool. So this might be a little bit easier to kind of see how things are working. And change it back to properties. Cool. All right, so I'm going to go to my read geo. I'm going to go to my folder, and I'm going to find in my camera object export, which is right there. And then I hit 1 to view it, and there is my object. Okay, so by default it just brings in the object. Okay, it doesn't bring in the camera too. So I need to bring in the camera, and by doing that I hit tab again and I create a camera. And I'm going to tell it to read the camera from the file. And then I click the little folder, and then I do the same exact file, camera object export. Are you sure? Yes. Okay. So let's see if it's going to do what it did before, and it is. So this is what it was doing before, is it would, the camera is not this far away from that, and it was constantly doing that. So what I would have to do sometimes is switch the view, switch it back, reload it, yes. Maybe I'll delete this and then read it again. Now you may say, well, why not just, eyeball it? Well, we can't eyeball it. This needs to be exact, and it should be exact because that's how we have it set up. Let's make sure, rewinding, yes. All right, I'm going to put everything together, and maybe that'll help fix it. All right, so I'm going to grab this and this. I'm going to hit the tab key. I'm going to create a scene. All right, and the scene basically just joins these two items together. And when we do a scene, that's like our 3D scene, the next step is to create a scanline render. Okay, so the scanline render says, okay, well, we have the render. Now where is the camera? And I'd say right there. So now when I hit 1, and then I hit tab over here, this is why it doesn't work, because you can see that's like way too tiny. That's like not as big as my image. So let me go back to the camera. Let me go back to this folder. I'll go to one of my other ones that's just a camera export. I'll hit tab here so I can see, yep. And so that one worked, exporting, I guess in that case, just the camera. for some reason wanted to work this time, it didn't work before. Just for fun, would it work if I went back to that? Nope. Yeah, so that one I just exported the camera by itself without the object, and that seemed to be happy. Just stupid. All right, so now when I hit 1 here and I view this, oh, it's working. Okay, so it's reading my geometry, putting into the scene, and then I have a camera, and that's being what we're seeing in the scene. I don't have an image loaded here, so that's why I'm not seeing anything, because this is just completely black. So I need to hit Tab, and I'll do color bars. And if I click that, boom, there's my color bars, and it's attached to my bowl. And what should happen is this should be exactly lined up to where it is inside my view. So if I switch to my camera view, no, you remember where it was, so it was there. All right, and obviously the real test will be when we put everything together. All right, so that's the 3D part, so we'll just set that aside for a minute. We can hit Tab and do a backdrop. I don't know why this comes up on mine. I must have done something. I think I added a plugin that does this that I don't remember it doing, but apparently I did. 3D setup. There we go. So now we have one that's 3D setup. We'll just keep that over there. So now I need to bring in my EXR. So I'm going to hit R over here and then find my EXR. So if I go to my images, which is where I put it, test EXR, there it is. And when I hit 1 on that one, you see that it was in the exact spot as the other spot. All right, so now what I need to do is pull out all the things. So I'm going to go to Shuffle, and I'm going to extract. In this case, I'll do the ambient occlusion first. There it is, ambient occlusion. And then I'll add another shuffle. Now, if I click here and add another one, it adds it like in chain. That's just how Nuke works. So typically, we want to disconnect and then create a shuffle and then connect it. The other thing we could do is just copy and paste. Okay, I know I only need 5, but just add extra ones for fun. Oops, get back in there. All right, so now I'm going to go to the next one, and I'm going to call this one, or go to the Z. Okay, now it will help if we go to each one of these and label it. So shuffle 1, I'm going to call AO. Shuffle 2, we'll call Z depth. All right, then we'll go to the next one. And this one we can do coat. And I'm not seeing these because I haven't hit 1 to actually see what it looks like. So again, you can do that if you want. Typically you don't need to. There's the shadow mask. Go to this one. Make sure you're double clicking it. This is the shadow matte. Go to this one and specular. Alright, so that should be it. Okay, now in this one I extracted the Z depth. That's why I ended up with 6. Before I just used it down the chain. Where is my albedo though? I must have missed that. Let me just copy this, paste it, connect it in. Code albedo, there we go. Alright, cool. Now, on here, you'll see if I go to the A for alpha, there is no alpha channel on this image. Yeah, everything's going to come in later on. Alright, so, oops. Now, looking at how we can construct this, okay, so the shadow stuff will be on the bottom. Z depth will come in later. We'll just set that over there, and so will AO. So we will have, oops, I didn't rename that one. Let me just rename that real quick. There we go. Okay. So code albedo will just set aside 2. Okay, so the way that we're going to construct this is we're going to put the shadows together, and then the specular together, and then the coat together. Okay, so all of these, this, and that should work as just joining everything together. Okay, these ones we're not going to use both. We're going to use one of these. All right, so let's go to shadow mask. That's what that one looks like. There's shadow matte. That's what that one looks like. Okay, so we'll use matte first, see how it looks, and then we can always switch it to mask. So I'm going to take this one, and I'm just going to merge. So I hit M, that with my specular. So A is going to be what is on top. B is going to be what's on the bottom. So I want the specular to be on top, so I'm going to grab this and hit Shift X, and that will switch the order. Okay, so now the specular is on top and the shadow matte is on the bottom. So now if I click merge and hit D for disable, you can see that specular, let me bump this up, you can see the specular coming in. Okay, so there's a specular. All right, now let's go here. And now what I want to do is add the coat on top of that. So I'll hit merge on the coat. My B will be that, because I want that to be underneath it. And then I will hit 1. And so now we have the coat. So now this should be enough to get us back to where we were. But if you look, obviously the shadow wasn't white, the shadow was black. So that's what the shadow should look like, is black, not white. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this shadow matte as a transparency for my other stuff. Now I could, I believe, go into the merge, and one of these, average color turn. Oops, I have to actually view it. I can't see anything if I don't view it. Put that back on top. And I'm just using the arrow keys and switching through. Now I won't be able to see anything happen right now because my scene is just, there's nothing under there. So even if it did turn black, I wouldn't be able to really see it. So I need to add a scene inside here. So I'm going to add the scene right after this. So I'm going to actually merge my shadow onto a item. So I'm going to add a constant. Actually, I have a wood image I'm going to use. So I just grab this wood picture from textures.com. And I'm just going to merge that with the shadow. So now if I just view this, the wood should be on the bottom and the shadow should be on the top. So I'm going to click the merge and hit Shift X. This changes the size of it because this is not the same size as that. So I'm going to click this and hit Reformat. And I'm just going to add a transform after this and scale it up. There we go. So now it fits the proportions enough to make it work. All right, so now I'm going to go back to my merge. Okay, now this I'm trying to get here is I'm trying to get the wood to look like it has a black shadow on it from the cup. So if I go back to the merge for the shadow and that, cycling through here, I'm trying to see if I can get that shadow to be black. There we go. So stencil does give me that information, or XOR. Okay, so that gives me a darkening right there. So that does work. Another way that I could do that is, and this is typically the way I do it, is I will add a constant, and I'm going to use the color information from this as a transparency map on that. So I'm going to say I want to copy, so I hit K for copy, and put that there. I'm going to copy the red channel, let's say, and that's going to be my new alpha. So now as the red channel comes into here, it's going to copy it onto this constant, and then that will be my new shadow. And then if I just set this one to over or multiply, that will work. Now, we're getting nothing. Why is I'm still getting nothing from that. Let's see. Red to alpha, yes. Oh, I'm only viewing the RGB. I need to view RGBA, and now I can see the alpha. There we go. Okay. So now we have an alpha channel. If I multiply it on here, it goes away because I need to pre-multiply this. And then multiply it on top of there. Why isn't that working still? Okay, constant, yes, yes. Alright, I didn't like being on multiply for this, so I just set that to over, and then it was fine. Okay, so there's my shadow matte doing that. Now, here's what's nice about Nuke. We can take this and just swap that to here, and now we'll get a different pattern because this shadow is a different looking shadow than this one was. Okay, so very easily we can come back later and do that. The other thing we can do is if we look at this, this is basically just like the opposite of what we want. I want white up here and black down there and white here. So the other thing I can do is add an invert node. I'm just going to stick it over here so we can see it. And you'll see it gives me the exact opposite. So this is another acceptable way to do your shadows. Instead of doing the constant and the copy and the pre-mult, I can use the invert. And then this multiply should work. Yep, there we go. Okay, and again, I just swap this. Okay, so there's multiple ways to get, the same results or at least similar enough results, especially in this case. As you get more complex, then things get a little bit more exact. There's a lot more testing involved. All right, so we have the wood transformed and reformatted so that it fits our 960 by 540. I have my shadow matte inverted and multiplied on top of that. And then this is going to go to my specular, so I'm going to hit 1 on there. And this will just be an over. Come on, Nuke. So that. Alright, let's do a plus instead of an over. Nope. Don't accept anything. Alright, let's delete that one. Let's make a new merge. This is the A. This is the B. Alright, I'm going to remove the alpha channel. Nope. Remove the alpha channel from my specular. Nope. Alright, it still doesn't want to play nice, so I'm going to, from here, I'm going to copy the, or from here, I'm going to copy this albedo and cut it out. Okay, so I'm going to just use K to copy this, drop it inside here, and it's copying the alpha into that. So if I click on this, there's the alpha, click on this, there's the alpha. So for whatever reason, it just wasn't playing nice. So now, if we look at this, here's the, oh my goodness. There's the before, there's the after. Okay, so now I can take this and add that on top of it, and everything works. It could have been just the specular from this one was actually cutting it out because there's some transparency there, but having removed that, it should have worked fine. There we go. Okay, so now this is everything kind of put together. I still don't have my ambient occlusion there, so let's drop this down. And I'm going to merge. That will be the B. And then ambient occlusion merges will be a multiply. Okay, now don't worry too much about adjusting values until you get everything kind of hooked up and you can see it all. If we look at the before and we look at the after, oops, you'll see that it's very, like, it's pretty much exact. Almost exact. You can kind of see there's some slight differences. just in some pixels, but I think it's good enough for what we're doing. Sweet. All right, and then again, I can come back and play with the shadow. You know, do I like this shadow better, or do I like that one? It's grainy because I didn't smooth it out when I rendered, so that could be fixed too. So don't worry too much about that. For now, I'll leave it at this. I could also come in here after and grab this shadow matte and hit G for grade and adjust the darkness of that shadow. I could also add a blur node to it. And that can help kind of soften it up too if I need to. On this merge, I can go to the transparency here, or the mix, and I can play with the mix as well. Or I can add, these are just ways that you can adjust these. I could add a grade anywhere after this grade, where I just adjust the alpha, and I just go to my gain. Nope. Oh, right, the alpha is not playing a role in this one. Nope. The way I did the other one had an alpha in it. So yeah, so I would just do the mix down there. All right, cool. So now we need to get the label on the side of this. So we have the label already set and ready to go right here. I need to get it into this mix. So I need to get it, basically I put it in right after the specular. So I'm going to organize this a bit better, because right now it's just clustered. It's like everything's together. So I'm going to click on this, add a dot node, and then if I hold control, then I can start to organize this a bit better so I don't go crazy. I'm going to click a dot here, drag this dot to there. Okay, and I know where this is, the other one's going to go, so I want to make sure I have a spot for that. You just stay there for now. I'm going to click a dot here, drag this to that, and let's drag this over. Alright, so there's my 3D setup. I can shrink this down, hold control to drag this into this mix, and then if I deselect, then reselect, there it is. Alright, so now I'm going to take this image here, and I'm going to merge it. So I just create a merge node, and I merge this into that, because I want it to be, well, I can do it here, that'll work. I may need to adjust where this alpha is. That's not a huge deal either, because I can just cut that out, put that in here. That will work better. I don't want to overwrite that alpha. I just need to then adjust where this is so that I don't have a weird line there. So this comes up nice and neat. There we go. And then this I'm going to pull in from here. There you go. So now everything's looking nice and organized. This line is crooked. Alright, so let's see what happens there. So here is our rendering. Here is a specular. Here is that rendering on top of the specular. Now as an over, it just overwrote basically the specular. I don't want that, so I'm going to change this merge to a plus or an overlay or something like that. Overlay, that looks nice like that, and this plus, that's like too much. Okay. Again, I can play with the mix to get it to mix, but I think the overlay seems to work really good. All right, now it does dim it because of how it's set up, so you could then again go through these and try to find one that you like best. Yeah, I think that overlay one is good. So now I put this on here, I put it on there, so now it's pretty dark. Now we get to the coat, and we get to that. Okay, so now that we can see it with all the other stuff, we just totally lost it. So now we go back to that merge and do it as a plus, and then just pull this down. Okay, so now it's still mixed in. We can still see it. I don't want this to be obviously color bars because that's dumb. Let me delete the color bars. Let me grab my SpongeBob picture. And this is just a ping that I downloaded. And what's happening is SpongeBob is going over the entire thing. I only want him to go onto a certain spot. So I'm going to hit T for transform. I'm going to scale him down to like 0.5. 0.1. There we go. And you'll see how he is now, the highlight is going right on top of him. So like he's like inside the cup. And then we can go ahead and I'm going to hit 1 up here. And go ahead and move SpongeBob around. We could then go back to this merge and we could play with the brightness of it. The color bars is a bit bright, so maybe we want to adjust the brightness of SpongeBob so he looks more like ingrained in it. You could also change the mode. So if you did an over or an overlay, maybe that'll work better. The overlay is gone. Yeah, so that over seems to work good. And now it looks like SpongeBob is on the cup. And what's cool is that this image can then be changed with whatever we want. So we don't have to worry specifically about that. What is this connected to? I think I'm just what I did. Okay. And then finally the Z depth. So I'm just going to disconnect here. Connect my Z depth. And my last node is right there. So that's the one that's going to get the Z depth on it. Oops. I have to copy this first, so I'm going to hit K for copy, put that in there, and then do my Z depth onto this. Okay, now for Z depth, if I click on this, all my values are the same, so red, green, blue, white are all the exact same number. So I want to copy this, any one of these red, green, blue, alpha, into my depth. Right there. So then I go and view this. I double click that so I can see it. I make sure it's on depth. I make sure it's on direct. I move my little dot. How do my node graph get back down there? Oh, I closed nuke. Dang it. I just realized it. I can make that depth of field just a bit bigger. Take down the blurriness a bit. Fix that ugly black shadow underneath. Just delete that grade, delete the blur. Alright, let me go back, add a new grade. There we go. So now we have a shadow down there. Now we have SpongeBob on the cup. He's inside the cup, so he's reflective. We picked up a little bit more light inside here because I chose a different specular and it chose a different ambient occlusion. So I actually am happier with the way that one turned out. And then if this were an animated camera, the camera would be animated, and then it would just move around the entire scene. All the other stuff that's here, oops, works perfectly with it. There's no adjustments that we really need to make. The only other thing we need to, sweet. So if I made an animation inside of After Effects of something happening, very easily I could put that animation on top of here. Just for fun, let me see if I even have, I'm sure I do. Alright, so I have a little flamethrower animation. Just got rid of SpongeBob, dropped the flamethrower animation in there. This is a Maya fluid effect. Sweet. So I just dropped that into that playlist. Instead of SpongeBob, I disabled the transform because I don't need that anymore. And now if I go back to my cup, that animation would play on there just like it was like that's mapped to the UVs. So it's right in the center of that UV layout. That's where that fire is coming in. It's pretty rocking. Sweet. So have fun with it. Obviously, if this is a still image or a animation, you still go to a write. It's just a matter of as you're exporting this out. I'm going to throw it here for a second. Cup composite. If it's an animation, you would put a dot and then the 4 pound signs and then a TIFF or Targa or whatever format you want out. If it's simply a still image, you would just do a .tiff. And then that would know this is the TIFF. That's what I'm rendering out. You could also render out an EXR. Just change the format name to EXR. Okay? And then we would hit render. Avoid using this MOV because it doesn't do a good job or as good of a job as After Effects would do. So typically I'll render out a sequence, bring that in After Effects and make it into a movie just like we do like when we render stuff out of Maya. Then you hit the render button and it'll say what do you want to render. Right now it's frame 1 to 1 because we only have one frame. If we had the dot pound signs, they would ask us for a sequence and we would type that in. Sweet. So, have fun.